A billionaire was trapped in a desolate, refuse-strewn alley, with his bodyguards a world away and his phone a spiderweb of shattered glass on the grimy pavement. Arthur Sterling was about to lose everything. Three men, specters of violence born from the city's forgotten corners, closed in. Their intentions were not a mystery. They were etched in the cruel glint of cheap steel and the predatory hunger twisting their smiles. In that moment, the man whose name could move global markets was just a man cornered, terrified, and about to be violently erased. He was no longer a titan of industry. He was prey, but the attackers, in their meticulous, hateful planning, couldn't account for the silent observer at the other end of the alley. At the edge of the encroaching darkness stood a 12-year-old boy whose world was a million miles removed from the penthouses of his city. A boy whose throwing arm, honed through thousands of hours of practice, was like a surgeon's scalpel, impossibly precise, and whose only weapon was a scuffed, unassuming rubber ball. This is a story about two worlds colliding with the force of a tectonic shift. It is a powerful reminder that our greatest assets aren't stored in a vault or tallied on a balance sheet. They are like muscles, forged in the quiet furnaces of discipline, character, and courage. It's a story about how, sometimes, in the moments of our deepest despair, help comes from the most unexpected places. Armed with the most improbable of weapons, Arthur Sterling lived a life of suffocating control. A life so shielded from the real world, it was less a life and more a museum exhibit, viewed from behind velvet ropes. His days were a blur of tinted windows and hushed meetings in boardrooms that perched atop skyscrapers, looking down on the city like a distant, indifferent god. Surrounded by a phalanx of security, he was less a person and more a priceless package to be perpetually protected. He had built a fortress of solitude, and in doing so, had become the warden of his own gilded cage. He hadn't driven a car in over a decade. The simple act of living had been outsourced. His existence was a frictionless transition from his climate-controlled penthouse to his armored sedan to his private jet. He believed this sterile perfection was the ultimate luxury, granting him the clarity to focus on what truly mattered, acquiring more. He was a collector of empires, but this relentless acquisition came at a cost. The world, with all its vibrant chaos, had become an abstraction to him, a series of data points on a screen. People were not individuals with hopes and fears. They were like pieces on a chessboard, which he moved for profit, either as assets or liabilities. Life, in all its messy reality, was something he watched from behind layers of bulletproof glass. On this particular Tuesday, the pressure was immense. A hostile takeover was falling apart because of a personal betrayal. The meeting had been a bare-knuckle brawl fought with legal jargon. When it ended, Arthur felt a desperate, suffocating need for air not the filtered, recycled air of his office, but real, unprocessed city air. Like a diver gasping for the surface. "Stop the car," he commanded his driver. His head of security, Marcus, turned from the front seat. "Sir, this isn't a secure area. We're in the old manufacturing district. I have to advise against this." "Did I ask for your advice, Marcus?" Arthur snapped. "Or did I give you a command?" "Stop the car." The driver slowed to a halt. They were in a part of the city Arthur only ever saw on crime rate charts of forgotten world of brick. Tenements and shuttered storefronts. It was a ghost of its former industrial self, a place his company had helped render obsolete, ignoring Marcus's protests. Arthur pushed the heavy door open and stepped out. The sudden noise of the city was a shock. He needed to walk, to let the chaotic energy of the street flush the impotent rage from his system. "Stay here. I'll be back in 10 minutes, he said, waving off his security. It was an act born of pure arrogance. He loosened his tie and started walking, deliberately trying to lose himself in the labyrinth of brick and asphalt. He was Arthur Sterling. What could happen to him? He soon found himself in a narrow, dimly lit alley. A shortcut, he figured. The high brick walls on either side seemed to lean in, swallowing the light. For a fleeting second, he felt a prickle of primal unease, an instinct he had long since suppressed. Then, a shadow detached itself from the darkness ahead. Another appeared behind him, blocking his retreat. A third emerged from a recessed doorway, completing the trap. His path was blocked. The front man held a rusty pipe. The one behind had a knife. They didn't speak. They just smiled, slow, predatory smiles that told him this was no random mugging. They knew exactly who he was. Arthur's blood ran cold. The usual hum of calculations in his mind went utterly silent. He reached for his phone out of useless instinct. The rules of his world of leverage, of wealth, were a useless foreign currency here. Here the only language was brutality. "Nice watch," the man with the pipe grunted. "The suit, too. Bet it costs more than my car." Arthur Sterling, titan of industry, did the only thing he could. He backed away, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He was cornered. And for the first time in his adult life, he was utterly, hopelessly, terrifyingly alone. Miles away from the gleaming towers of downtown, but in a completely different universe, lived Leo. At 12 years old, Leo's world wasn't defined by what he had, but by what he could do. He lived with his mom, Sarah, in a third-floor walk-up where the building's ancient. Pipes always seemed to be groaning a mournful tune. Sarah worked 2 jobs. A relentless cycle of exhaustion fueled by a fierce love for her son. She was a constant blur of motion, leaving before Leo woke and returning after he slept. Their communication was measured in handwritten notes left on the kitchen table, brief messages of love and instruction. "Have a good day, sweetie. Don't forget your homework. Love, Mom." Leo's only inheritance from the father he never knew was a gift, a powerful, almost preternatural throwing arm. His most prized possession was a simple, solid rubber ball. It felt like an extension of his own body. That ball was his confidant, his escape, his purpose. Every day after school, he went to a deserted courtyard behind an abandoned warehouse. On one of the sprawling brick walls, he'd used chalk to draw a small, perfect square. That was his strike zone. And for hours, he would practice. His motion was pure. Fluid poetry, a physical sonnet perfected through thousands of repetitions. The deliberate rock back, the high leg kick, and the explosive snap of his wrist that sent the ball flying. The ball would hit the chalk square with a sharp, echoing thwack that reverberated through the empty courtyard. He wasn't just throwing a ball. Each pitch was a brushstroke, painting a masterpiece of precision and creating order out of the chaos of his life. He learned by studying grainy clips of legendary pitchers at the public library, mimicking their intense focus and unshakable calm. This was his sanctuary. When he stood on his makeshift mound, the worries that gnawed at him about his mom's tired eyes, about the holes in his sneakers all disappeared. It was as if stepping onto his mound was like entering another dimension where only his skill mattered. The sharp thwack of the ball was a sound of certainty in a life full of unknowns. It was proof that he had control over something. "There's more to life than that old ball," Leo, his mom, would say gently. "I know, Mom," he'd reply. "But it's my thing," and it was. He was honing a skill to an impossibly sharp edge. He just knew that when he held that ball and stared down the distance to the chalk square, he felt a sense of purpose that nothing else could provide. On this particular Tuesday, Leo finished his homework and felt the familiar pull of the courtyard. He grabbed his ball, plus a spare, and headed out. He threw, retrieved, and threw again, lost in the comforting rhythm. Thwack! 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 He was in a trance when a different sound cut through the air, sharp and ugly. A grunt of pain. An angry, muffled voice. It came from the alley that ran alongside the warehouse, a place he always avoided. He froze, his arm mid-motion. He held his breath, straining to listen. Another shout, this one filled with terror, made the hair on his arms stand up. His mom's voice echoed in his head, a mantra of survival. You see something bad, you walk away. You don't get involved. He should run home and pretend he heard nothing. But then he heard a sickening thud, followed by a choked cry of pain. His mom's advice was a loud alarm bell in his head. But his conscience was a deeper, stronger drumbeat, pulling him forward. He clutched the rubber ball, its familiar weight, a small comfort. He took a deep, shaky breath and crept toward the mouth of the alley, his sneakers making no sound. The alley had become Arthur Sterling's cage, and the air was thick with the metallic scent of his own fear. The initial shock had given way to a raw, primal terror. He was backtracking, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender that felt foreign and humiliating. "Take whatever you want," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. He threw his wallet on the ground. "The watch, too," he added, starting to unclip the platinum timepiece. "Just take it," the man with the pipe chuckled. "Oh, we'll take it," he said, kicking the wallet away. "But this isn't just a robbery, Mr. Sterling. This is a message." The man with the knife circled him like a shark. The third man blocked the exit. Arthur realized with a fresh wave of terror that this wasn't random. The brutal business deal, the veiled threats, it all clicked into a horrifying conclusion. This was corporate warfare, played out with street-level brutality. "Please," Arthur begged, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. He was a man who commanded, never pleading. The leader ignored him. He swung the pipe, not at Arthur, but at the brick wall beside his head. The impact sent a shower of red dust into the air. "You ruined a lot of lives when you shut down that plant on the east side," the man hissed, his face a mask of twisted rage. "My father worked there for 30 years. 30 years, and you threw him away like a piece of trash. The plant." To Arthur, it was a rounding error on a quarterly report, a liability to be eliminated. Now that liability was standing in front of him, holding a steel pipe and a 30-year grudge. The man with the knife lunged, grabbing Arthur by the collar and slamming him against the brick wall. The impact knocked the wind out of him, and his head hit the brick with a sickening crack. Stars exploded in his vision as he slid down the wall. The man with the pipe raised it high for the final killing blow. Arthur slumped on the ground, closed his eyes. This was how it ended. Not in a sterile hospital bed, but here, in the filth of a forgotten alley. At the hands of a ghost from a balance sheet he'd long forgotten a pathetic, meaningless death. From the end of the alley, Leo watched, his body trembling. He could see it all. The rich man slumped on the ground, the three figures looming over him, the glint of the knife, the raised pipe. His mind screamed at him to run. Keep yourself safe. But his feet were glued to the pavement. His eyes were locked on the sheer injustice of it. 3 against 1. A helpless man on the ground? It was just wrong. He looked down at the solid rubber ball in his hand. He thought of his chalk square. He thought of the thousands of hours of practice that had gone into it. He'd never thrown at a person. He saw the man with the pipe tense his shoulders for the final swing. There was no more time to think. In that split second, a strange calm washed over him, as if the world had gone into slow motion. The chaotic alley became as simple as the chalk square on his wall. There was only him, the target, and the ball. The silence was shattered by approaching sirens. For Arthur, it was the sound of order returning. For Leo, it was the sound of trouble. He instinctively took a step back, ready to run. "Wait," Arthur croaked. "Don't go." Leo hesitated. The man no longer looked like a billionaire. His suit was torn, there was blood in his hair, and his face was pale. But his eyes were filled with desperate, drowning gratitude. Before Leo could decide, 2 police cars screeched to a halt, their flashing lights painting the walls in chaotic colors. "Police, don't move," an officer shouted. The officer's eyes took in the scene and filled in the blanks. In this part of the city, the narrative wrote itself, like a well-rehearsed play. They saw a wealthy white victim and a scared black kid from the neighborhood and immediately cast them in their familiar roles. One officer rushed to Arthur's side. "Sir, are you all right?" The other approached Leo, his hand on his weapon. His eyes narrowed with suspicion. "You stand right there." "What are you doing here, kid?" Leo froze. The officer's tone was cold and accusatory. The calm he'd felt during the rescue evaporated, replaced by a familiar, sinking fear. He wasn't a hero. He was a suspect. I was just... Leo stammered. How could he explain it? "I saved him with my baseball pitch." It sounded wild. "Did you see who did this?" The officer pressed. "Were you with them?" "No," Leo said, his voice sharp with panic. "I saw them hurting him. I just... ... double quotes, Arthur. leaning on the first officer, saw what was happening. He saw the terrified fear in Leo's eyes and the reflexive suspicion in the cops. He moved through the world like a ship with the wind always at its back. Now he was seeing the cruel undertow that dragged others down, and he would not let it take this boy. He pushed himself to stand straighter, and his voice regained its familiar timbre of absolute command. "Officer," he said, his tone cutting through the tension. "That boy is not a suspect. He's a hero." The officer questioning Leo turned, surprised. "Sir." "You heard me," Arthur said, his gaze fixed on Leo. "There were 3 of them. They had a pipe and a knife. They were going to kill me." He pointed to the discarded weapons. "This boy?" He stopped him. "He saved my life." The officer looked from the billionaire to the skinny 12-year-old. Then, at the innocent-looking rubber ball. The pieces didn't fit, like trying to solve a puzzle with the wrong parts. "Sir, are you sure? You've had a head injury. Do I look confused?" Arthur snapped. "I know what I saw." He took them out. With a ball, just then, Marcus and the rest of Arthur's security team ran into the alley. Arthur waved them off impatiently. "I'm fine, Marcus." He kept his eyes locked on Leo, taking a weak but determined step toward him. "What's your name?" Arthur asked, his voice softer now. "Leo," the boy whispered. "Leo," Arthur repeated. "Look at me, son." Leo slowly raised his eyes. "Thank you," Arthur said, pouring every ounce of sincerity he possessed into those 2 words. "You were brave. Braver than anyone I've ever met. You saved my life." A paramedic tried to lead Arthur away, but he brushed them away. The only thing that mattered was the frightened child who had done something extraordinary. He didn't just see a hero. He saw a kid who had risked everything. Arthur made a decision, as swift and absolute as any multi-billion-dollar acquisition. This wouldn't be the end of their story. It would be the beginning. He owed this boy a debt that could never truly be repaid, but Arthur Sterling always paid his debts. The following 24 hours were a whirlwind demonstration of the Sterling Empire's full force. While Arthur was getting stitched up, his lawyers descended on the police precinct. The preliminary report was shredded and rewritten from scratch. Leo's name was entered into the official record only once, under the clear heading, Heroic Civilian. As soon as his doctors cleared him, Arthur didn't go to his penthouse. He turned to Marcus. "Find out where he lives," he commanded. "Take me there." Now, they found Leo's apartment as the sun was rising. Arthur climbed the 3 flights of creaking stairs, each step an ascent into a reality he'd never known. He knocked on door 3B. It was opened by a woman in a faded waitress uniform, her eyes wide with exhaustion and fear. "It was Sarah, Leo's mom, Mrs. Johnson," Arthur said gently. "My name is Arthur Sterling, your son. He did something for me last night. May I please come in?" She stepped aside wordlessly. Arthur entered the small, clean apartment and saw Leo at the kitchen table. Arthur crouched down to eye level with the boy. "How are you feeling, Leo?" Leo just shrugged, unable to find words. "Leo," Arthur said, his voice earnest, "what you did last night was the single most incredible thing I have ever witnessed. That accuracy, that courage, that's more than a skill. That's a gift." He turned to Sarah. "Ma'am, I owe your son my life. A debt like that can't be paid with a check. I want to offer him a future." He laid out his plan. He would move them to a safe home. He would enroll Leo in the best private school in the state. And he would create a position for Sarah at his company. A real job with a real salary. So she would never have to work 2 jobs again. But that was just the start. The real reward, Arthur said, turning back to Leo, is for your gift. I made a phone call last night. To a man named Coach Davis. Leo's eyes shot up. Even he knew Eagle-Eye Davis, a living legend, a retired MLB pitching coach, famous for molding some of the greatest arms in the game. He's an old friend.
Arthur
Explained. I told him what happened. He called it a lucky shot. So I made him a wager, like a high-stakes poker game. I'm flying him here. If you can show him what you showed me, I win. Suppose he's not looking at one of the most phenomenal raw talents he's ever seen. In that case, I'll donate $1 million to his favorite charity. A week later, Leo stood on the pitcher's mound of a private baseball field. Coach Davis, a gruff older man with a skeptical scowl, stood behind home plate with a radar gun. "All right, kid," the coach grunted. "Mr. Moneybags here says you've got a golden arm." "I've seen 1,000 golden arms turn to lead." "Show me." Leo was nervous. But then he saw the catcher's mitt. It was a target, just like his chalk square. The world fell away. He went into his motion, the fluid movement that was his alone. The ball shot out of his hand, hitting the catcher's mitt with the sound of a gunshot, a perfect strike. The catcher shook his hand in stinging pain. Coach Davis's jaw dropped. He looked at the radar gun as if it were a faulty calculator that had just told him 2 + 2 = 10. It read, 78 mph from a 12-year-old. It was impossible. "Do it again," Davis whispered, his voice stripped of its skepticism. Leo did. And again, and again. Each pitch was a missile of uncanny precision. Coach Davis finally walked over to Arthur, his eyes shining. "The $1 million is safe," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You win the bet, Arthur. My God, you win. This boy, he's not 1 in a million. He's 1 in a billion." That day marked the actual transformation. Leo had a new home and a new school. Still, more importantly, he had a mentor in Coach Davis and an unlikely father figure in Arthur Sterling. Arthur was transformed too. The ambush had cracked the bulletproof glass around his heart. Through Leo, he began to see the world not as a spreadsheet, but as a collection of human lives, each with its own struggles and incredible gifts. The boy whose life he had changed had, in turn, saved him from the gilded cage of his own making. It wasn't a weapon of steel or a security detail that saved the billionaire in that forgotten alley. It was a skill honed in lonely courtyards by a boy with nothing but a rubber ball and a will of iron. It was an act of courage from a child who refused to walk away. This story proves that the size of your wallet doesn't measure true greatness, but by the strength of your character and the courage in your heart. A single act of bravery rewrote a boy's future, ended a mother's struggle, and redeemed a billionaire's soul. It reminds us that our true wealth lies not in what we own, but in the humanity we share and the courage we have to step out of the shadows and help one another. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments below, and subscribe for more stories that inspire and remind us of the hero within us all. In the space of a single heartbeat, Leo acted. He didn't shout. He just moved, his body flowing into the sacred motion he knew better than his own name. Target 1. The man with the knife. Leo's arm whipped forward. The dense rubber ball became a dark projectile, traveling the 50 feet of the alley in an instant. The sound wasn't the familiar thwack against brick, but a sharp, wet crack of rubber impacting bone. The ball struck the attacker's knife hand with pinpoint accuracy. He shrieked in shock and agonizing pain. The knife clattered uselessly to the pavement. The man staggered back, clutching his shattered hand, his face a mask of disbelief. The other 2 attackers froze. The leader, pipe still raised, spun around. What the hell was that? He snarled, searching the shadows. He didn't get an answer. He got another projectile. Leo already had the second ball out of his pocket. His next target was the leader. This time, he aimed higher. The second pitch was even faster, fueled by a surge of righteous adrenaline. It struck the leader squarely on the side of his head. The impact was a solid, sickening thud. The man's eyes rolled back. A grunt escaped his lips as the pipe fell from his nerveless fingers. He stumbled, completely stunned, the world swimming in a dizzying vortex. 2 down. 1 to go. The third man, the lookout, was now in a full-blown panic. His partners had been neutralized in seconds by an invisible enemy. This was not what he had signed up for. He turned and ran, his heavy footsteps vanishing into the city. The man with the injured hand scrambled to his feet and followed, desperate to escape the haunted alley. The leader was the last to recover. Shaking his head, He saw his partners were gone. He looked down the alley and could make out a slight, slender silhouette against the faint light beyond. A kid, the sheer impossibility of it, mixed with the blinding pain, was too much. Fear, cold and absolute, finally pierced his rage. He stumbled, turned, and ran. The alley fell silent. The only sound was the gentle thump, 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 of a solid rubber ball as it rolled slowly and came to a stop near Arthur Sterling's expensive, scuffed shoes. Arthur pushed himself up, his body aching. He saw the discarded pipe and the fallen knife. He saw the attackers running away like frightened animals. He was alive. He looked down the alley, his mind struggling to process what had happened. A miracle? Then, a figure stepped hesitantly out of the shadows. It was a boy. A small, skinny black kid in a faded t-shirt. In his hand, he held another rubber ball. He was looking at the ball on the ground near Arthur's feet, his chest heaving, his eyes wide, with a mixture of terror and awe at what he had just done. Arthur stared, his jaw slack. This child, this boy had done what his entire highly trained security team couldn't. He had saved him with a ball. Arthur opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He could only stare at his impossible pint-sized savior.